Real quick, I'd like to give a massive shout out to all the homies on Patreon who chose to support the cult and help keep the lights on. If you want more information on how to support the channel and get your name up here at these fucking chads, check out the video description below. All right. Hello, my friends. After a long awaited time and many requests, here is the Warlock Pre-BiS video. This has taken me a long ass time to do because one, I didn't want to just give you an 80s upgrade and tell you that it's BiS because it's much more complicated than that. Of course, you can just follow the 80s found on WoWhead or on here and you'll be absolutely pumping. And for those that just wanted a general guideline for that reason, this video will start with a couple different 80s upgrades for you. However, if you're looking for more information, which I highly suggest, look no further. This video will have it all. I'll show you a couple 80s upgrades, then I'll go over each armor slot and show you a few options for those that like a little bit of variance in their gearing. Before we begin though, I need to shout out the lovely, the beautiful, the overpowered Warlock Discord, your one-stop shop for everything Warlock related. Not only that, but I urge you to check out Zeph's phenomenal WoWhead guides for Warlocks. He goes into even more depth in all of these armor slots with even more options listed, okay? Both it and the Warlock Discord will be linked in the description and in the first comment that'll be pinned below. Oh, and one more thing before we start. You see that red button that says subscribe? You want to do me a favor and turn that gray? Thank you. Follows and thumbs up mean the world to me and it lets me know that I'm making the right content. Also, leave a comment if you have any questions, comments, or if I missed something. I also stream on Twitch 6 days a week over at twitch.com/CrixVibes, where I main a Warlock in the Guild Fusion, as well as I raid on all the casters. Come stop by to meet some like-minded homies or just to meet some new friends. Here are some quick 80s upgrades for the 3 specs. I know that I could just post a quick Pre-BiS video with an 80s link, but there's so much more to that when it comes to gearing. I'd almost say that there is no perfect Pre-BiS, as there are so many options and gear sets that we can choose from that differ from a few DPS. Each of them have interchangeable pieces that you will end up swapping around depending on your build, what professions you have, what you can get your hands on, whether you have gear from TBC or not, and most importantly, your hit rating, which plays an even bigger role in Wrath. The rest of the video will be me going over each armor slot with multiple pieces of gear on each, and I'll talk about the options. Each slot is timestamped, so feel free to navigate to where you want. Before we can go over the gear itself, let's talk about something very important. Hit rating. Hit rating got a nice change in Wrath. You no longer have that innate 1% chance to miss. In TBC, you could be hit capped and still have a 1% chance to miss, and it was super irritating. So this now means if you're hit capped, you will never, ever miss. And missing a spell in Wrath is a much bigger deal than it was in TBC. Missing a Haunt as Affliction or Conflags as Destro is noticeably horrible, and you don't want that to happen. Luckily, there are tons of ways to get hit in Wrath. Talents from both you and other classes. Certain races give you hit, plus there are gems, enchants, food, and more that can supply you with the hit you need to make sure that you're never missing a spell. The hit cap is 17%, which sounds like a lot, but know that you get 3% from a Shadow Priest Misery or an Abumi's Improved Fairy Fire. You get another 3% if you choose to take the talent Suppression and the Affliction tree, which was reworked and now applies to all Warlock spells, rather than just the Affliction spells like it was in TBC. Lastly, you get another 1% hit from having a Draenei in your party. This equates to you needing 14% hit if Horde, or 13% of Alliance. If you put 3 points into Suppression, then you will only need 11% of Horde and 10% of Alliance. Another thing to discuss before gearing is the gems. As you can imagine, with Wrath came new gems, and a ton of them. Luckily, it's pretty straightforward for us on which to choose. Our meta gem is Chaotic Skyfire Diamond, which requires 2 blue gems. Use 2 Purified Twilight Opals to activate your meta gem. Use Rune Scarlet Rubies in any red sockets while using any of these 3 gems here for your yellow sockets. Which of these yellow gems that you use will depend on your hit rating. In a perfect world, you can use the Reckless, which is spell power and haste. However, early game gearing, don't be surprised if you find yourself using one of these 2 hit gems. I personally prefer avoid using the full hit rigid gems unless absolutely necessary. But do know that hit is the most important thing that you can acquire, and getting to that hit rating should be priority so you don't miss anything. Next up, I want to touch on the gear you want to get with your Emblems of Heroism. Emblems are the Wrath's versions of Badges of Justice. You spam heroics, you get emblems. You buy really good gear. There's other places that get emblems as well, but the majority will come from heroics or raids. All of these are your Pre-BiS options. Typically, Sundial will be your first purchase. You'll be using this until you get your 2 heavily contested trinkets from Nax. And if you're demo, this trinket remains best in slot into phase 1, so get it. Next purchase is Belt. The belt is very good, as it not only has insane stats, but it also is one of the only belts at this level with a socket. This doubles down is really nice since you can add a belt buckle to it, which will allow you an additional socket, leaving you 2 gems to put into an already very strong belt. Your next purchase depends largely on what you've already been able to obtain while doing your heroic spamming, either neck or offhand. If I happen to get a decent neck, then I'll get offhand first. Or if I got an offhand, then I'll get neck first. Lastly, this offhand over here, which is Pre-BiS for demo, it's marked with purple. So when you get to the stage of buying the Emblem gear, get this offhand instead of ward. Next up is TBC gear. While there's a lot of gear from TBC that is good or viable in Wrath of the Lich King, I'm not going to name them all. Instead, these are the very common pieces of gear that you can expect to be wearing in the Nax if you are lucky enough to get them. They're on par with Pre-BiS, some slightly worse, some slightly better, but I'll get into them when I get into those separate sections. For now, I just wanted to show you what you can expect to use from TBC if you were able to obtain any of them. Last thing before we begin is the tier 7. I just want to show you the set and the set bonus. As for the set bonuses, the 2 set is not the worst thing in the world, but it low-key is pretty fucking bad as well. in comparison to other 2-sets in the game. You do not need a prow running your 2-set for any of the specs. You will, however, be running 4-set, which is actually pretty good, but that's for another video, as you cannot obtain your 4-set before raid at all. You can, however, get your T7 chest and gloves for a hefty amount of emblems, which both of them will be good, and we'll talk about it more when we get to those sections. But TLDR, you use tier 7 chests for all the specs, but you do not use the tier 7 gloves. You will need the tier 7 gloves, like I said, so you can get the 2 pieces from Nax and end up with your 4 piece. All right, we can finally get started. So I've color coded some of these to make it easier to see. Hopefully it's not too confusing, and if it is, let me know. I'm colorblind as well, so I might have got colors mixed up, but the goal of this is you only need to pay attention to certain colors. White is just everything. If anything is highlighted with the blue color, then that means it's specifically for demonology only. If the slot is a different best in slot piece than the rest of them, okay? Affliction and Destruction gear pretty much the same. Outside of Destro, not really caring about Spirit as much as Affliction, so you can swap some of the Spirit pieces if you want for haste. And as for the demo, your job as a demo lock is to support your raid. Okay, you have 2 options. You can, well, I mean, I guess there's 3, because there's the people who are going to play demo locks that aren't going to support their raid, and that's fine. But if that's you, you can kind of ignore the purple spots. The purple is a support demo. That means one of my warlocks is a support demo. My goal in life is to supply as much spell power as I can. So when my pet crits with Demonic Pact, my raid gets the fattest amount of spell power. For this reason, I'll make a video about this later. I'm personally going to be sacrificing my personal DPS by losing hit rating. I'm going to lose a couple % of hit in order to get big spell power or spirit pieces. So you're going to see me mention that throughout this a lot. That's up to you on that one. I do not suggest losing a ton of hit, but I'm down to lose a % or 2 of hit. I think it's worth it, especially if it's a good trade-off and you're benefiting your raid a lot on it, because that is your job. That is just how I'm playing it. I know quite a few demos that are playing that way. You do not need to play that way. I know even more demos who are not playing that way because they want to just pump and blast, which is okay. They're both solid, viable options of gear. Anyway, lastly, this will also be assuming every piece of gear on this list is in the game. As of right now, everything I have listed here was on the beta, but if for some reason something is not out when live hits, then simply go to the next best item on the list. All right, you guys ready? Starting with the head slot. Now, these are the 2 main options for your helmet. You have Titan Forge Hood of Dominance for 40 Wintergrass marks, and then you have the engineering goggles. As with every single phase for as long as I can remember, engineering goggles are once again super strong. Now, which of these 2 you choose is very, very simple. Watch this. How's your hit rating? Like that. That's all you need. If you need a hit rating, which you will, take Titan Forge Hood. If you do not need hit and you're engineering, you can use the engineering helm, which leaves us with a couple pieces from TBC that are slightly worse than the previously mentioned, but are still extremely good alternatives if you're able to get any of them. Lastly is the Forgotten Shadow Hood. This is your pre-BiS if you're a demonology. Side note, like I mentioned earlier, from here on out, anything that is marked with blue is strictly if you are your guild support demo lock, meaning just like me, we are doing everything in our power to give the biggest demonic pack to our raid as possible. This means that I'm stacking as much spell power and spirit since it converts to spell power. Or like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to drop my own hit rating for some spell power or some spirit. That being said, be careful and don't completely butcher your personal DPS as you do pump really hard as demo. Anyway, this Forgotten Shadow Hood has 5 less spell power than the 2 best in slot helms. However, you trade that for 66 spirit, which is worth way more than 5 spell power. And to wrap it up, this is your helm enchant. You need Kieran Torn Revered, which you will get anyway. If you didn't already know, rep is a joke in Wrath. You just go to the Kieran Torn guy at the stairs, do a quest, and then go back to the quartermaster, buy the tabard, slap that tabard on, and wear it while you're doing dungeons for 1 day. You will have this enchant. Also, the enchants are bind on account, meaning you only need to do it once and you can send it to all your alts as long as they're on the same account. Next up is the neck slot. Now, here there are a few viable options. However, only one neck can rule them all. Encircling Burnished Gold Chains. A beautiful neck with 59 spell power, 25 hit rating, and 34 spirit. We talked about this earlier, so you already know you'll want this pretty quick. As for the alternatives, I want to talk about the PvP neck. The first one is the Deadly Gladiator neck, which you need honor and arena rating for. I'm only listing this because I know people will be PvPing. Arena opens 2 days before the raids launch, so technically if you plan to PvP, you could get this really easily and in time, and it is pretty good. In terms of the stats, you give up the spirit from the emblem neck and trade for more spell power and a hit rating. The second PvP neck is all honor, and it's pretty much the same thing as the emblem neck minus the spirit. I will say though that I don't feel like it's worth farming either of these PvP necks up unless you already intend to PvP, because the emblem neck is only 25 emblems, so you know, pretty easy to get. A very good BOE neck that you can get is a titanium spell shock necklace. This lacks the spirit but brings it with it a socket. However, you can expect this neck to be pretty goddamn expensive at launch. Another solid alternative from TBC if you're jewel crafting is the pendant of Sunfire. It's got a solid socket in there to bring the spell power closer to the BiS ones, however lacking the spirit. Lastly, if you're watching this and the raids are already out, then please ignore everything I just said and pick up Chain of Latent Energies. This is a very strong BOE neck that drops only out of Nax 10 and can save you 25 emblems if you're watching this after the raids release. Next up is the shoulder slot. This will depend largely if you are able to get your hands on some TBC gear. Both Amos of the Convoker and shoulder pads of Knowledgeable Pursuit are extremely strong heading in the next. Amos being Pre-BiS for Affliction and Destruction. You can use Darkruin Mantle if you don't have either pair of TBC shoulders. That'll work as well. Now, if you're a demo, you lucked out because your Pre-BiS is actually a blue BOE found everywhere all the time, and it'll be super cheap on the auction house. You lose 4 spell power compared to even the TBC versions. However, you get a large chunk of the much needed spirit. As for your enchants, if you're Inscription, you get to use a 70 spell power enchant and 17 critical strike, which is a pretty big deal. If you're not Inscription, then just get the 24 spell power and 15 crit rate one, and the enchant comes from Sons of Hodir Exalted, which is the only annoying rep to farm. It's like one of the only ones that we have to do that is not with a tabard. If you are watching this and you're wondering how to get it, you can do the quest line, right? But after the quest line, you can just buy a bunch of those relics of Ulduar or whatever. I don't think they're gonna be too expensive, but I can see them being a little expensive actually now that I say that, because everybody's gonna be wanting that Sons of Hodir rep, but that's the way you can do it. Next up is Cloak. We've got a few options here, but the main ones you'll want for both Destro and Af is the Death Chill Cloak. This is a rather expensive BOE that will only become available once whoever is crafting it gets a lore master. Usually it doesn't take too long for someone to get it though. As for demo, your Pre-BiS is Reanimator's Cloak. You give up the haste and crit, which you don't care about, in return for a socket that once you gem equates to more spell power, plus the 35 spirit and even this 37 spirit and the 31 intellect on it. As for the alternatives, if you were lucky enough to get your hands on the TBC Cloak, Tattered Cape of Antonidas, this is a very, very, very good cloak. Actually beating out Death's Chill spell power, however losing out on the haste and the crit. And lastly is the PvP cloak, which I guess I should have mentioned earlier, but the PvP gear isn't bad all the way around. It's actually pretty good. I just don't want to sit here and list every PvP piece on every slot, since 1, they're not Pre-BiS, and 2, I'd run out of room. This PvP cloak, however, is actually really good, so I put it on here. It supplies you with the same amount of spell power as Death Chill, but it also gives you a hefty amount of hit rating, which may or may not be needed at this time. That's your decision. All up to you. As for the enchants, you have 3 to choose from, and it will simply depend on your profession. If you're tailoring, like many of you will be, you will use Lightwave Embroidery, which will give you a chance at a 295 spell power proc for 15 seconds with a 60-second inner cooldown. If you're not tailoring, but you are engineering, you can use the Springy Arcana Wave for 27 spell power, as well as turns your cloak into a parachute cloak for 30 seconds. Lastly, if you're neither of those professions, don't worry, because you can still enchant your cloak with greater speed. This will give you 23 haste rating. Next up, the chest slot is very straightforward. Purchase your tier 7 chest for 80 emblems and do not worry about anything else. I have nothing much to say here. Actually, honorable mention, Spellweave Robe is actually insanely good. It loses out the T7 chest, but this is a BOE that'll be made by most tailors to get their points up. So you actually will see a ton of these on the auction house, and they should not be that expensive. Get one and use it until you get your T7 chest. Both of these robes from TBC, Sunfire robes and robes of Ghostly Hatred, are very, very good alternatives if you happen to have them. Both are viable until you can get your tier 7 chest or until you farm up the gold to buy Spellweave. Completely up to you, like I said. As for the enchant, just go with the Major Spirit. Spirit is a much bigger deal to us than it was in TBC, as you guys have learned, so just get used to it. Next up is Bracers. Bracers are a fun one, and we have quite a few very good options that are almost on par with each other. However, there's always one BiS, and that is the Cuffs of Winged Levitation. This is an epic drop from the Oculus, but really, really good. And if you're a demonology, you can save yourself the farm and get yourself some Ancestral Sinew wrist guards. After putting a spell power gem in it, it yields 9 more spell power than the Cuffs of Winged Levitation at the cost of 5 spirit. A couple good alternatives are the Azure Cloth Bindings out of Violet Hold Heroic and an epic, and then the Savage Wound Wrap out of Drakthar Keep. Both are very good alternatives until you can obtain whichever of the Pre-BiS ones you actually want. As for the enchant, use Superior Spell Power, as it's the only thing worth mentioning. Next up is gloves. This is the second slot with tier 7 listed. It gets a little dicey here, as technically Spellweave gloves are not only better than tier 7 in terms of stats, but are also a tailoring BOE that is really cheap to get. Where it gets dicey is a set bonus. While our 2 set isn't that good for any spec, it still does bring us some damage, and some people prefer that over the raw stat gain, even if the stat gain is small. Not only that, but you will need your 4 set tier 7 eventually. So you will at some point need these gloves. What I suggest is just you to pick up a nice pair of Spellweave from the auction house and wear them until you can either afford to spend emblems on the gloves, which is you will get after all the other emblem gear, and then just use the 2 set if you feel like it, or if you prefer the 2 set, or just keep using Spellweave, and then when you go to Nax and get your other 2 pieces, just slap your 4 set on. As for demonology, you should use a Glove of Glistening Runes, as it supplies the most spell power and spirit out of the group. If you rated in TBC and were able to get your hands on the overpowered handguards of Defiled Worlds off of KJ and Sunwell, then you're in luck. These are actually insanely strong with 2 sockets and is on par with the tier 7 gloves in terms of stats, and in a way could be better if you need the hit rating. As for your glove enchant, if you're engineering, you'll use the Hyper Speed Accelerators, the infamous haste enchant for your gloves, giving you 340 haste for 12 seconds on a 1-minute cooldown. If you're not engineering, then you'll use the exceptional spell power enchant. Next up is belt. Here we have 3 options. The first one is the plush sash of Guzba, which costs 40 emblems and is your pre-BiS one for Aff and Destro. If you're demonology, then you want to buy Sash of Jordan off the auction house, as it is a BOE. I'm unsure how expensive it'll be because I've never had it, to be honest, but don't worry because you can still get the Girdle of Bane as a very, very good demo alternative while waiting to afford Sash of Jordan. One of the biggest things about belts moving into Wrath is that you can enchant them now. Well, kind of. You can put a belt buckle on them, which allows you to add another socket to the belt, meaning the plus sash and Sash of Jordan would actually have 2 sockets on it. Lastly, if you're engineering, you can put the frag belt on your belt. This will allow you to occasionally throw a cobalt frag bomb. This just allows you to milk out slightly more damage from your explosives. Next up is pants, and oh man, do we have plenty of options to choose from, all of which are so close to each other in terms of DPS that it almost doesn't matter what you choose. Starting with the 3 pants from TBC. Leggings of Calamity, Pantaloons of Growing Strife, and Calming Strife. These are the 3 pre-BiS pants based on what you're playing. Very simply put, if you're Affliction, Growing Strife or BiS. If you're Destruction, Leggings of Calamity or BiS. And if you're Demonology, Calming Strife or BiS. That being said, all 3 of these are so close to each other that you won't be able to see a difference in what you choose. Now, for those who were not able to get any of these 3 pants, have no fear. Woven, brasse, I don't know how to say this shit. Leggings out of Halls of Lightning Heroic are an amazing alternative for Aff and Destro, while Breaches of the Collar are an amazing alternative for you demo locks out there. An honorable mention is the PvP pants, as they're actually very, very good alternatives, as well as if you happen to be PvPing and still waiting for your woven pants to drop. There's only one enchant you can use for your pants, and that is the Brilliant Spell Thread. Next up is boots. The boot slot, in my opinion, is pretty simple. You go get your tabard for Warmrest Accord, and then you do your heroics, and after a short time, you'll be exalted and can buy those banger ass pair of boots. This rep doubles as you can get the Warmest Bracers too we talked about earlier once you're revered. These sandals of Crimson Fury will tie you over until Nax. The tier 6 boots from Sunwa are a good placeholder and alternatives until you're able to get the rep for the sandals. If you're watching this after Nax has came out, so after October 6th, then you should disregard every single thing you read about these boots and just go and pick up the Arcanic Tramplers. These are a BOE that only drops inside of Nax and are insanely good. Same with the boots of Impetuous Ideals. However, the Arcanic ones are slightly better due to the Spirit. As for the enchant, you have 3 to choose from. If you're engineering, then you should be getting the Nitro boots, which literally gives you rocket boots on your boots, plus 24 crit. If you're not engineering, then I would use Ice Walker if you're hurting on crit. Otherwise, use Tuskar's Vitality so you can have some movement speed. Next up is rings. As always, there's a ton of ring options, all of which depend on your hit rating. However, usually even this early in the game, I've never had issues with hit, bad enough to warrant needing a hit ring. I'd suggest both Analyze's ring and Band of Guile as your 2 rings, unless you're Demonology. Then I would suggest Signet of Kirintorn or Titanium Spellshock ring. The only thing about Signet of Kirintorn is it's 8,500 gold and you replace it pretty quick. A Demonology will get Lost Jewel or whatever. You'll get your phase 1 BiS pretty quick on rings because you usually typically get tunneled to gear. So I would, while yes, Signet of Kirintorn is your previous one, it's 8,500 gold. So leave that one up to you. Just know even the upgraded version is not BiS after this. So use your money wisely on that one. Both Signet of Hopeful Light and Ring of Northern Tears are extremely good. However, Signet of Hopeful Light, you need to farm Exalted rep, and I can't be asked to do that. But you can buy Ring of Northern Tears for cheap as it's a BOE on the auction house, so it can tie you over until you can get one of the better rings. As for enchants, as always, if you're enchanting, you can enchant both of your rings with 23 spell power. Next up is Trinkets. This is a pretty easy slot. You have a new trinket from Emblems called Sundial of the Exiled that you will want ASAP. Spend the first badges you get on this immediately. This comes with 84 crit and a proc of 590 spell power for 10 seconds. Actually absurd. So good, in fact, that Demonology will use this until Old War. For your second trinket, it will be Mark of the War Prisoner, a very, very comfy trinket with a ton of much needed hit on it. This drops in Violet Hold Heroic, and I wish you the best of luck getting it to drop for you. It's one of those things like Quag's Eye from TBC where you can you're just farming it forever, or it drops right away. Now, if you're jewel crafting, you can pick up this to kickstart you a little bit. It's a very solid trinket with 2 unheard of sockets, with one of them being the ever elusive blue socket. This is very close to Mark of the War Prisoner. However, I feel like it loses out due to the extra hit that Mark has on it. Next up is the weapons. Weapons are pretty straightforward. Well, they will be if Titansteel Spellblade is in the game. It was on the beta, but supposedly it's not supposed to be out until TOGC or some shit, so I have no clue if it's going to be in, which is why it's marked with red. However, if it is in, like I hope it is, this is the best in slot for every single spec. Don't even worry about anything else and just get this. Yes, it will be expensive, and yes, you will replace it in Nax at some point, but so who cares? It's good, okay? Now, I will say as a demo lock, one more time, I would not buy it, only because the first turning tide in every guild should go to the demo lock, hands down. They make the most benefit out of it, not only for them, but for the entire raid, because there's spell power on it, right? And that's your phase 1 BiS weapon. So if you're a demo lock, kind of save yourself some buck each and just wait for the raid and get it if you want. Now, if you have the gold, then feel free to spend it. If you're Aff or Destro, I'd 1000 bajillion get this regardless of the price. Now, if this weapon is not in the game, then you can go with either Staff the Draconic Combat, or you can go with the offhand and one hand combination using either Flameheart Spell, Scalpel, or Curseless Blade if you're demo, since it's got the Spirit on it. I personally like the Staff better for all the specs, but the issue is your hit rating. Your main hand and offhand both early game have a large amount of hit, and it credits for a lot of it. So if you go Staff, you'll be significantly hurting on your hit rating. As for the enchants, you have one for your Staff and one for your main hand down here. Just pick the one that you are wearing, you know what I mean? But also, don't do what I did and buy the Staff one thinking it was for the main hand or vice versa. Pay attention. Next up is for those of you that did not choose the Staff in the previous slide. You've got 3 offhands to choose from here. The main 2 are from emblems, and it's pretty simple. Use Ward of the Violet Citadel if you're after Destro. Otherwise, if you're demonology, use Handbook of Obscure Remedies, as the supplies do with some Spirit, which we all know by now is lovely for demo locks. You give up some hit in return, but like I said, that's up to you. Faces of Doom is a very good BOE alternative that you can buy off the auction house for pretty cheap, and it can tie you over until you can afford to get the emblems for your proper offhand. Next up and last up is wands. With wands, you actually have quite a few options for wands, all of which are very, very close to each other, and I kind of think it doesn't matter which one you choose, but hey, the 2 TBC wands, if you're able to get them, are absolutely phenomenal, and you can easily wear either of them in the next. The only thing that they're missing is hit, and for that reason, Wand the Sand Lane is very, very good. This is a decision that's left up to you. I personally have the TBC wand, so I'll be using Wand of Cleansing Light as demo, since I prefer the socket and the Spirit over the hit rating. Well guys, that's it for this one. I really hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it helps somebody out there. I went a different route than my normal videos, so I would really appreciate any feedback on it. Wrath launch is upon us, and not only will I be trying to level as fast as I can, I've got 6 total characters to level up and gear for raid. I'm pretty excited, and I hope you are all as well. Please press that thumbs up to like the video on your way out. It helps me grow, and it lets me know that you guys like these kind of videos. Also, I stream over on Twitch at twitch.tv/Crix5s, where I stream 6 days a week, and I play all the casters. Come meet some new friends and some like-minded homies. Much love, and good luck with launch.